Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and I'm back with another deck tech for you. Today we are going to be taking a look at Junk Reanimator for the Born of the Gods Season of Standard. So this deck was actually designed by Dan, and he was looking to play a mid-range style deck that could either ramp into its creatures with Sylvan Caryatid, or more efficiently, we can put them into the graveyard with Grisly Salvage, Commune with the Gods, and Lotleth Troll, only to then whip them back with Whip of Erebos, or put them into play with Obzedat's Aid. So the entire deck list is in the description below where you guys can check it out and use it as a reference. We also have some gameplay for this deck that you guys can check out, which will be linked in the description as well. So the first creature that we have in this deck is Lotleth Troll, being probably one of the most efficient and resilient creatures that will help us out in our strategy. Lotleth Troll is able to regenerate for 1 black, making him resilient against removal that our opponent may have, and oftentimes our opponent will have to waste 2 or 3 removal spells that target him to actually be able to get rid of him permanently. And oftentimes that's okay for us, because if our opponent's wasting removal on a Lotleth Troll, especially if it's in multiples, then they are leaving us open to play bigger creatures, and our opponent won't have a response to them usually. Lotleth Troll is also good because we can discard creatures from our hand and fuel cards like Whip of Erebos and Obzedat's Aid. But more importantly, our Lotleth Troll becomes a active threat or a active blocker for anything that our opponent may be doing. So if our opponent's playing really slow, we can grind them out with Lotleth Troll and have a big creature by turn 2 or turn 3. Or we can just have it as a blocker and just be able to block our opponent's creature for days. We have 4 Sylvan Caryatid in this deck for mana acceleration and color fixing as well, allowing us to play a turn 3 Whip of Erebos and just to kind of stick it on the board while we go about and start dredging stuff into our grave. But ultimately, it also allows us to just play the fair game and just go and cast our creatures directly from our hand. We have 3 Shadowborn Demon, which is a 5/6 for 5, and it has flying, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it's going to destroy a non-demon creature, making it pretty good in this meta right now, because it can get rid of a lot of different things that could be problematic for us, even if it means getting rid of a Scavenging Ooze that could be eating stuff out of our graveyard. Having the removal on a stick here with Shadowborn Demon is great. Now the only downside is that at the beginning of our upkeep, if we have fewer than 6 creatures in our grave, we are forced to sack a creature, but usually with Shadowborn Demon, we're already going to be dredging enough stuff into our grave with Salvage, Commune, and Lotleth Troll that we usually don't have to worry about that constant upkeep trigger happening. We do have 2 Obzedat Ghost Council, so it's another way to drain our opponent out of life. And up against decks that are playing stuff like a Azorius Charm, like whenever it comes down to control, he's good because we don't have to attack with him and we can still win games. Draining our opponent for 2 life and gaining 2 life is exactly where we want to be with this type of a deck. And it's also really sweet because Obzedat doesn't get exiled by Whip of Erebos if we are using his end of the turn ability. If we're using his end step ability where Obzedat's able to exile himself, Obzedat supersedes Whip of Erebos' exile if we're whipping him back from the grave, thus allowing us to whip back an Erebos, have him on the battlefield, we can swing with him or whatever, and then we can exile him with his own ability and then have him come into the battlefield at the beginning of our next upkeep. So that's a small little interaction that you guys want to remember, because that is the exact ruling with Obzedat as of now. We also have 3 Armada Wurm, being a really solid way to have an enter the battlefield ability that will stick multiple creatures on the board. So Armada Wurm's a 5/5 for 6, and whenever it enters the battlefield, we get another 5/5 on the battlefield with Trample. So now we have 2 creatures with Trample, both of them are 5/5s, and our opponent is in a tough situation. So if we're hard casting Armada Wurm, now we have 2 creatures that are sticking, but if we're whipping it back, we get the Armada Wurm that's going to be able to swing in for the turn, but we also have a 5/5 creature that's going to remain on the board and threaten our opponent even more. The next creature that we have is probably the most interesting one in here, being Sepulchral Primordial. So Sepulchral Primordial has Intimidate, and whenever he enters the battlefield, we are able to take a creature card from our opponent's graveyard and put it onto the battlefield under our control. So with cards that we have in this deck like Shadowborn Demon, where we're able to get rid of our opponent's creatures, we can then go and we can play Sepulchral Primordial and just take stuff from our opponent, put it on the battlefield under our control permanently, and just have it stick and stay there and be yet another threat for this deck. We do have Sylvan Primordial as a 1-of in the main board. We also have one more in the sideboard, but Sylvan Primordial is really good at being able to get rid of a variety of different things, like planeswalkers, detention spheres, or even just lands. So whenever he enters the battlefield, we're able to exile a non-creature permanent, and then we're able to search our deck for a forest, which in this deck we can search for something like Overgrown Tomb. Our shock lands are also forests, so it gives us the possibility of searching for Overgrown Tomb or Temple Garden, or even just a basic forest. It really just depends on the situation and what we still have remaining in our deck, but oftentimes just being able to ramp with the Sylvan Primordial as well is pretty good. We have 3 Angel of Serenity, so whenever it enters the battlefield, we're able to exile up to 3 target creatures that are on the battlefield and or are in graveyards. So with Angel of Serenity, it's going to be able to get rid of stuff that our opponent may have in terms of creatures on the board and just kind of wipe the board from them, and it'll stay wiped until the Angel of Serenity leaves. Or we can start taking things from our graveyard and exiling them under our Angel of Serenity. So if we're discarding stuff with Lotleth Troll and we're able to have Angel of Serenity get some stuff back into our hand, we can then just kind of fuel our Lotleth Troll even more. But Angel of Serenity is awesome because it's kind of another removal spell that we have on a creature, and it can clear a board for us and allow us to just get in more points of damage and get our opponent as close to 0 as we can possibly get them. We do have one Abhorrent Overlord, which was actually something that I can claim that I added to this deck. So this was a card that I snuck into Dan's deck, and he just really enjoyed this card. So whenever it enters the battlefield, it is going to give us 1/1 Harpies equal to our Devotion to Black. Now again, it's another card with a downside, so at the beginning of our upkeep we have to sack a creature, but the dude is a 6/6 with flying, which is still pretty good, and even if we're playing him, he gets destroyed and we get to whip him back. Making a bunch of 1/1 Harpies is just fine for us. Now we're getting into our non-creature spells, so we have Grisly Salvage, so that's one of our ways to be able to essentially dredge or mill our own deck, where we reveal the top 5 cards of our library, and we're able to take either a creature card or a land from that and put it into our hand. The rest go into our graveyard, so it gives us a little bit of fuel for our Whip of Erebos or our Obzedat's Aid. And we also have Commune with the Gods, which pretty much kind of does the same thing as Grisly Salvage, but instead we are going to be looking for a creature card or a enchantment. So Commune with the Gods is awesome because it lets us get our Whip of Erebos. So if we reveal a Whip of Erebos in those cards, we get to take that and we get to put it into our hand, which is a really, really awesome feeling. So speaking of it, we have Whip of Erebos. So 4 mana to play it and 4 mana to whip a creature back. All of our creatures have lifelink, which is just phenomenal whenever you're playing up against decks that are trying to grind you out. And the creature is going to stay on the battlefield for the duration of the turn. We can only use Whip of Erebos at a sorcery speed, but at the end of our turn, or if the creature would be removed from the battlefield and would go anywhere else, the card is exiled instead. So that's the only downside of Whip of Erebos. You don't really get the ability to use it and reuse it constantly, but with Obzedat, like we explained, you just kind of get to get around that Whip of Erebos exile. So that's the only exception, is Obzedat. Obzedat's the only guy that is not affected by that exile by Whip of Erebos, but having the ability to give lifelink to your creatures is just really awesome, and being able to cheat things out is definitely what we want to be doing with this deck. And then the last non-creature spell that we have here is Obzedat's Aid. So Obzedat's Aid being 5 mana at a sorcery speed, allowing us to put a permanent card from our graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So Obzedat's Aid is awesome because it's kind of like Whip of Erebos, but we don't have the downside of it being a permanent and our opponent being able to get rid of it with like Detention Sphere or something like that. So we get to just be able to cast it, and our opponent is going to have to deal with a creature that is permanently there as opposed to just for the turn. So Obzedat's Aid just giving us another way to just get things back out onto the battlefield, and giving us 5 total Reanimator style cards. Now for the land base, we are playing 4 Overgrown Tombs, 4 Temple Gardens, 4 Godless Shrines, 4 Temple of Plenty, and 4 Temple of Silence, along with 2 basic forests, 1 basic plains, and 1 basic swamp. For our sideboard here, we are playing 4 Centaur Healers, which are going to come in for the matchups where our opponent's trying to be really aggressive. They're trying to get us to 0 as quick as possible. Now that may be through like burn, or that could be through something like just mono red aggro or something like that. The Centaur Healer is going to come in those matchups. We have 3 Sin Collector that will let us pick apart our opponent's hand when it comes to instants or sorceries. So it's good up against decks that are playing like a lot of removal in instant or sorcery fashion, or they're playing a lot of efficient things that can help them like accelerate themselves along or keep themselves in the game. So an example, cards like Sphinx's Revelation. So Sin Collector is good up against decks that are playing like a lot of removal like mono black, and it's good up against decks like Control because we get to take away counter spells and Sphinx's Revelations and stuff like that. Equally, we have 2 Duress for pretty much that same thing. So we have 2 more ways of taking things from our opponent, and our Duress has the benefit of allowing us to just kind of take more than we could take with Sin Collector. So we're also able to take Planeswalkers with Duress, but the benefit of Sin Collector is it, of course, is a creature, so we do have the potential of whipping it back with a Whip of Erebos if it ends up getting destroyed. We do have 3 Archangel of Thune for some more life gain interaction for us. So flying, lifelink, 3/4 for 5, and whenever we gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that we control. So the Archangel of Thune is going to synergize with a variety of different cards that we're playing in this deck, like Obzedat, our Whip of Erebos, our Centaur Healers if we're siding them in, and ultimately it just fortifies our ranks. It makes our dudes even bigger, which is exactly what we want. And 1 Sylvan Primordial. So we have another Primordial whenever it comes down to exiling non-creature permanents and getting rid of stuff like Elspeths and other Planeswalkers and other cards that are annoying like that. And last but not least, we have Abrupt Decay. So Abrupt Decay is a 2/of for us, and it's going to allow us to get rid of non-land permanents that are 3 converted mana cost or less. So at an instant speed, it lets us get rid of creatures, it lets us get rid of like a card like Ashiok, Detention Sphere, Underworld Connections, Night Veil Spectre, all kinds of stuff like that. It just kind of goes in the matchups where our opponent's playing a lot of efficient permanents with 3 converted mana cost or less, and they're playing them in a high quantity where Abrupt Decay just kind of saves us in those situations. So even though it's not something that we can whip back and it's not a synergy that interacts with our graveyard, it's just another removal spell, and it's a pretty efficient one, especially when it comes down to cards like Detention Sphere, which can be a nuisance. So that's our deck tech here. If you guys enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel and especially hit that thumbs up button and show some support for the channel. Like I mentioned, the entire deck list is in the description below. But until next time, guys, peace out. If you guys enjoyed this video and would like to see more Magic the Gathering content, you can hit the subscribe button on the screen and you'll be notified whenever a new video is available. And for those of you guys that enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh!, you can check out my Yu-Gi-Oh! Channel by clicking on the video in the top right-hand corner. Also, be sure to check out our sponsors for the channel, ABU Games and Europe's MTG Madness, for all of your Magic the Gathering needs, no matter where you are.